the promises that Trump made and where we are now. And we're talking about, actually, it was funny, before we talk about China, maybe it's a good question for you. I was trying to understand, like he was hinting, and something Tucker, his brother Tucker, talks about the same thing, is that there's people behind the scenes that are making a lot of the decisions. And the elected officials don't have as much influence or power as we would like to think. Now, obviously, we've been talking about the deep state for a long time. But he said Trump's presidency would kind of illustrates or highlights that more than ever. And it's almost impossible to deny now. So before we talk about Trump's visit to China, just a quick question for you, Larry, is what's your thoughts on that? What's your understanding of who really makes the decisions behind the scenes? I know it's a question I don't usually ask, but I'm curious to get your thoughts.
Well, it's an excellent question. It's been growing ever since really World War I, and you could argue to a certain extent since the Civil War, when the federal government became so important to the country. It wasn't all that important before that. The states pretty much ran everything. Well, after the Civil War and the power that generated for Washington, then lots of people, the Vanderbilts, J.P. Morgan, and a host of others, began to understand that the real power could be in Washington, was probably going to be in Washington, and Grant helped with that in his presidency. He didn't want to, but he did, because it took that in order to keep them at bay. On one occasion, he and his Secretary of the Treasury, and there aren't very many historians who've written about this, actually saved the country from a massive run on gold made by a group of these people. And they came within a hair's breadth of cornering the gold market. And that would have been a disaster, and Grant knew it was going to be a disaster, so he brought real power to bear on them and stopped them from doing it. But ever since then, these sorts of people have been behind the scenes, as it were. And they've grown as we've become more powerful. Washington's become more powerful. They've grown in their capacity and their willingness to influence the federal scene. And you get to the 30s when they actually try a coup. There were people who were very much in favor of Mussolini in Italy, people who names you would recognize today, like Prescott Bush, George H.W. Bush's father, George W. Bush's grandfather, who participated in the planning for this. Smedley Butler, a Marine general on tap to be the commandant of the Marine Corps, was suddenly pulled away from that possibility because he went to Congress and exposed at least part of this coup plotting. And so we've had these people for a long time, and wow, these people attract people like Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and others before them, and they attract their money. And so it's become very much a deep state. And the Turks actually invented that phrase in terms of political discourse. It's very much been a facet of our government. And I think it's grown worse as our presidents grew weaker and less capable. And you can put the finger on the beginning of that with Bill Clinton. And every president after that has been a relative newcomer to this sort of power. And it's taken at least 2 to 3 years to get ready and to be competent. And in those years, they insinuate themselves, and it's very difficult to get rid of them.
We should do a whole episode on this when things calm down politically, Colonel. That's a really nice crash course in 4 minutes. I didn't know it's been going on for that long. And maybe I'll add one more question. How influential is it really? Because I think it's not binary that they make all the decisions, and it's not binary that the president makes all the decisions as he theoretically should. In the middle, is it leaning which direction more? And I'm assuming it's getting worse.
I think it's getting worse, and I think it's principally because we have become, in all respects, an economic entity, and that's the easiest place to influence. Whether you're influencing the Fed, you're influencing the Treasury, OFAC, whatever aspect of the government, it's easier to bring power to bear now because the economy is so important, if not the most important element of the empire, I like to call it. And you can influence that, and you can influence it in so many ways through so many different people, and you can do it largely in secret. That's
actually a very good point, because when it is a business, when it's based on economic incentives, it's a lot easier to influence when it's about money. When
Yes.
it's a bit about ideology, for example, or religious beliefs or whatever it is, those are things that are harder to, that it's harder to buy someone who is ideological, if that makes sense.
True, but they have learned, they being some of them have learned, and this is particularly true of those behind the MAGA group, if you will. They have learned how to use such accoutrements of our society as religion to increase their power.
That's what Buck said earlier, Buckley. Well, Colonel, again, we should definitely do this. I'll message you after this to do a session on this when you have time. Again, when things calm down, which will probably be at the end of this administration. What do you make of the meeting in China? So I'll read out a statement that was put by the White House. I'm sure you've seen it, just for the audience. Trump had a good meeting with President Xi of China. The two sides discussed ways to enhance economic cooperation between our two countries, including expanding market access for American businesses into China and increasing Chinese investment into our industries. Leaders from many of the U.S.'s largest companies joined a portion of the meeting. The presidents also highlighted the need to build on progress in ending the flow of fentanyl precursors into the U.S., as well as increasing Chinese purchases of American agricultural products. So we're almost finished, but that's all about business so far. The two sides agreed that the Strait of Hormuz must remain open to support the free flow of energy. President Xi also made clear China's opposition to the militarization of the strait and any effort to charge a toll for its use. And he expressed interest in purchasing more American oil to reduce China's dependence on the strait in the future. Both countries agreed that Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. So that second part surprised me in terms of agreeing, according to the White House, agreeing not to charge a toll. Iran can't charge a toll. China made the statement that is an empty statement because everyone agrees on it already, but symbolic, that Iran shouldn't have a nuclear weapon and there should be a free flow of energy in the Strait of Hormuz, and China possibly buying American oil to reduce its dependence on the Strait of Hormuz. That was a surprise to me. I'm not sure if that's meaningful in any way, and what do you think it means?
Well, I think China is always after diversification. One of the things that capitalism with Chinese characteristics emphasizes is never putting all your eggs in one basket. So that would be a pro forma statement, almost like a statement about Taiwan is a pro forma statement. Let's back up for a second, though, and let's look at the two perspectives here. And they were best reflected in the opening statements and in the very consistent approach Trump has brought to putting his team together for this dialogue. It's not like Dean Acheson or John Kerry or Colin Powell or any other Secretary of State in American history. In those times and with those people, you would have had a 6 months, 3 months at least, maybe 2 at the minimum, preparation with experts. You put together teams that were going to assemble around each of the issues you wanted to deal with, like the Strait of Hormuz, like the war in Iran, like agricultural products to China, like sharing technologies and so forth. And you would have these teams ready to go and sit with Chinese teams of similar expertise. Not so here. There has been zero preparation for this that I can detect, and my State Department colleagues tell me zero preparation other than being notified it was going to happen and putting together what? All businessmen. So that tells Xi right away what he's dealing with. It tells him what he's got to comport with and what he's got to get his people to deal with. I suspect he was already smart enough to have his teams associated with that very agenda, all business. And all business with CEOs, not with people interested in the state of the people in the republic, but people interested in the state of their corporate interests and how China might enhance those interests and deal with those interests. At the same time, look at what the New York Times just reported, and I'm expecting Trump to put Kash Patel on this one as well as the other ones he's already got him on. Ferret these people out at the Times, ferret these people that leak this information, and let's prosecute them. That's what he's going to tell Kash Patel to do, because the Times just put out stories about China using third countries to furnish arms to Iran. And it also put out other information that's detrimental to Trump's attempt to have a good meeting with President Xi. This is not what you do in the Trump administration without being responded to by some kind of action. And I think that's going to happen. So you've got a huge contrast here, and Xi seems to have adapted to it really swiftly. I suspect he already thought it would be that way. He's met with the man before. And so he assembled his own entourage to deal with this. Business, pure business. Not really interested in the state of anything else except perhaps the war, because Trump would probably like Xi's help in getting it brought to a close. And Xi is going to give him all the pro forma answers as to how he will render that help and assistance. But he's not going to do anything at all, because right now it's a fundamental precept of Chinese policy to let the empire kill itself. Don't do anything to aid and abet it, so to speak, unless it can be done and gotten away with. But we don't want it to go too precipitously, and we don't want it to go disastrously, because it will suck a lot of us into it, whether we care or not. And we do care. So we need the care and feeding of the empire's descent into the Thucydides trap, which Xi even mentioned. I couldn't believe he put that into his opening remarks. But he has got all the things that you need to say, all the buzzwords ready to go.
What did he say in his remarks? Sorry, I missed that.
Well, he said we need to avoid the Thucydides trap, where the sinking power and the rising power fight. He's no nut. I mean, he's no idiot. He studies this stuff. His teams are very competent. He's very competent. And so he's saying all the right things. He's doing all the right. He had two choices, really. He could confront Trump in a sort of belligerent manner, or he could do what Confucian philosophy tells him to do, which is when your enemy is being defeated by his own hand, do not disturb him. But he doesn't want that enemy to go catastrophically, because he knows China has a lot of assets and interests that would get sucked into that catastrophe. But he's very content to watch us kill ourselves.
They are so strategic. They are so strategic.
Very Chinese too. Very Chinese.
What do you make of him saying that, or the White House saying that China's considering buying oil from the U.S.? Is that a concession from the U.S.? And also for China to say that no one should control the Strait of Hormuz and charge a fee there? Is that a concession? Is that empty words?
I think not. Totally. It could be in the long run, but it won't be Xi that makes them empty words. It'll be Trump and us that do that. But he's, as I said, he is very interested in diversifying. He doesn't want to put all his eggs in one basket. And right now he's got lots of his eggs in a Russian basket, to include billions of dollars worth of construction and pipelines already pumping, and pipelines contemplated that don't run east and west. They run north and south. And they essentially debouch into China and furnish it with all the LNG and fuel it could possibly need. But that's always going to be in the back of his mind as chancy, to be that dependent on another country, another single country. So he's going to want to diversify. China is one of the few countries in the world with such a powerful economy, the world's most powerful now in my estimation, that really has no indigenous oil assets or gas assets. Mm-hmm. They've got all kinds of things going on to try and change that, deep mining and such, but they don't seem to have a whole lot of soil that produces this kind of fossil fuel bonanza. So they've got a lot of dependence overseas. Russia's taking care of that right now to a certain extent. Others are, like the ones in the Persian Gulf. I think about the last time I look, about 19% of China's oil was coming through the Strait. That's a considerable amount when you think about it. But China also has other people to go to if it has to. But it would like to have some of the cornucopia that the United States enjoys through fracking mostly.
A report just came in from Channel 12. Not sure if you agree with it, but that's Channel 12, so we take it with a grain of salt. According to Israeli Channel 12 source, Israel has raised its alert status to its highest level in anticipation of a potential resumption of the war with Iran following Trump's return from China. The Israeli military is reported to be preparing both offensively and defensively for the possibility of immediate renewed hostilities with Iran.
That doesn't surprise me, because I've said all along I was hoping I was wrong, very much hoping I was wrong, that what we're really doing is posing another negotiation ceasefire deal while we plan and get ready to massively attack Iran again in conjunction with Israel. I'm watching what's happening in Lebanon to see what kind of diversion of forces from Lebanon is done in order to do that. And recently I've seen some planes held down and some planes not flying strikes in Lebanon. And I think that's because of what you just said. I think we are going to attack Iran full out. And this will be it. This will be it, and it won't accomplish anything, I don't think, except kill a lot of innocent people on the ground. But I think we're out of ammunition at the point that we go 10 or 11 days. And this won't be carrier air power to the greatest extent people are expecting, I don't think. That's not really very effective, and it's very costly in terms of tanking because you're so far away now and you don't dare come any closer. It'll be every asset the United States has in its Air Force from all over the world, reserve components, active components. It'll be B-52s, it'll be B-1s, it'll be B-2s, it'll be everything we can throw at it.
So you're saying it will be more than what we've seen so far?
I think so. And I think it'll be more indiscriminate too. We're really worried that the New York Times reports, for example, and others too, like Reuters and others that are fairly dependable, that Iran really still has 60 to 75% of its ballistic missiles already ready to go.
There's even another report, Colonel, saying 90% of their missile facilities are not destroyed, only 10% destroyed, according to the New York Times latest report.
I think that's probably true with regard to the facilities, and by that I mean simply the ability to launch these missiles. Here's the thing that frightens me, and yet I think I'm being a realist here in saying this. I just turned down an offer this morning to go to the former DNI complex to get them to come back out and publicly affirm their decision back in, what was it, 2009 or so, as I recall, in the intelligence estimate, that Iran was not building a nuclear weapon. And I said, I can't do that. I'm not going to do that because I don't think they believe that anymore. Those of them who are smart enough to keep up with things, what they believe is that Iran, as Ted Postol has said very dramatically, is probably building a weapon underground. And sooner or later, probably sooner more than later, they're going to announce or they're going to demonstrate, God forbid, that they have such a weapon. And then it's going to be checkmate with Israel. And my question is, what will Israel do? Because if Israel's hit with 5 or 6 nuclear weapons, particularly on the missiles that Iran has, and it launches, say, 45 or 50 of its missiles at Iran is going to ride it out and Israel's going to disappear. So this is not a positive development for Israel. It's not a positive development for the region. And I don't think ultimately it's a positive development for Iran because of what we might do in the aftermath of this. But I can understand why they would do it.
So I've got more questions on that. Chinese office, the president's office just put out a statement. So I read the White House one before. I'll read out an excerpt from the statement. It's a long one. President Xi stressed that the Taiwan question is the most important issue in China-US relations. If it is handled properly, the bilateral relationship will enjoy overall stability. Otherwise, the two countries will have clashes and even conflicts, putting the entire relationship in great jeopardy. Taiwan independence and cross-strait peace are as irreconcilable as fire and water. Safeguarding peace and stability across two Taiwan Strait is the biggest common denominator between China and the US. The US side must exercise extra caution in handling the Taiwan question. And that we've seen similar statements by Xi earlier, is that Taiwan is their main issue. More important than Iran, more important than trade, more important than anything. And that's been historically true.
I could go back to 2003 in our meeting with Wang Yi, who was not then foreign minister. He was a young and up and coming guy. And the foreign minister, you probably knew at that point, Chen Shi-chen had just died. At that point, probably knew more about North America and particularly the United States than any other person in the MOFA, the Minister of Foreign Affairs in China. And it was always the first thing the Chinese brought up. Very first thing. Didn't matter if you came to have coffee, they would bring it up right there in the coffee clutch. They would say, you got to settle this Taiwan issue. We don't want this Taiwan issue to derail everything. Number one issue. If Xi Jinping has an Achilles heel, that's the issue that he has it over. And if we really test it, we'll be sorry, because then we'll be in a war, and he knows, and we know that that war is going to end in a nuclear exchange. So you got to treat that issue very carefully with the Chinese. They're not kidding, and they're not kidding, particularly now that they are pretty much one-on-one with us, if not slightly ahead of us, in almost all the accoutrements of a real war. So it's just there, and it's irrational, but it's there, and you have to consider it. It was always their first talking point.
It was. Back on the likelihood of war. Why do you think they weren't able to solve it in that meeting? Because China has a lot of influence over Iran. Trump seems he wants an off-ramp. The Iranian demands seem to be pretty extensive. They haven't budged from their initial demands. And now their latest demands, I was speaking to Ali Hashim from Al Jazeera, who broke the story 2 days ago, that Iran is now requesting unfreezing of assets, lifting of sanctions, and the control of the Strait of Hormuz, and reparations before they even discuss the nuclear program.
And
so for me, those demands...
Removal of the illegal sanctions.
Removal of sanctions, unfreezing of assets, control of the Strait of Hormuz before they discuss the nuclear program. There is no way, and they know it, there's no way Trump's going to accept those. So I'm just really flabbergasted by the where we stand. Why weren't Trump and Xi, seemingly they weren't able to solve Iran? Xi said statements that support America's position, almost like he's giving them the green light for the war. And Iran's demands are not, there's no concessions in them. So it's like things are turning out not as I expected, and I'm trying to figure out why.
I think if you're parsing what Xi's doing right now, you're looking at an inscrutable situation. The Chinese want you to be looking at an inscrutable situation. What he says in public and what he says in private are going to be two dramatically different things. Yeah. And I would love to have a decent readout on what he says in private, because I think those are going to be the words that make the difference and are the salient words. And I suspect that what he's going to say is, this is a stupid war and you shouldn't have started it. And I don't know if I can help you get out of it, because it's stupid and it has so many spinoffs like the Strait of Hormuz and maybe a global recession followed by a global depression. I'm going to do what I can on the Iranian side to influence them to be more amenable to what the possibilities are. But you have to be that way too, and I don't envision you being that way. What do you have to say to that, Donald? And Trump's not going to have anything that Xi is going to buy to say to that, nor is any of his entourage. What's Elon Musk going to say about it? Have you noticed how Musk has sort of dominated the YouTube video so far? Walking around with his cell phone and everything, and kids following him and so forth.
He's great.
Yeah, he is. I'm not sure I'd want to have him be the chief person behind the scenes working the puppet, but nonetheless. So it's really going to be unseen by us what results from this meeting. Maybe we could judge it somewhat by how angry Trump is on the trip back, or how angry he is deplaning.
Yeah, true.
You know, I don't know, but I don't think we're going to know much about the real exchange.
True. And there's another way of looking at it. Maybe behind the scenes, President Xi said, look, I can't do much on Iran. The best I can do is give you a political support by saying, hey, they should not have a nuclear weapon. The Strait of Hormuz should be open. Or if anything, President Xi might be indirectly trying to drag the US back into this war. A lot of people have been saying it. As you said, there's nothing better than watching the empire hurt itself and damage itself and weaken itself without you doing anything. Eat itself up. I think that's the words that you said. So maybe this is what Xi's doing now, saying, oh, yes, Trump, they shouldn't have a nuclear weapon. Strait of Hormuz should be open. They should not charge a fee. We agree. And then Trump goes like, all right, now go fight them, weaken yourself, and then keep sending weapons to them through third parties, as we saw in that New York Times report. That's a possibility, but I'd be surprised if the US falls for it.
It's a possibility, but I don't think Xi is the kind of person who believes the pressure cooker he would then be creating is manipulable by China, that he can keep that pressure from bouncing back on China, for example. So he's probably going to err on the side of caution rather than on the side of it's going to happen anyway. It's inevitable. They're going. But like Ricardo Alarcón in Cuba told me one time, even a dying elephant can thrash a lot of grass, and Cuba's pretty close. China might be a long way away, but a dying elephant can thrash a lot of grass. So he's going to be circumspect, I think, and he's going to be very careful about this. New York Times reported about them selling through other countries or passing through other countries arms for Iran. I would guess is probably true because I'm hearing that too. It didn't take the New York Times to tell me that. So, what's Trump going to say about that when he gets that? He's bound to read that article. They're going to shove it in front of him.
But Trump will just say fake news. It's always the same playbook.
But then he'll go after the people that leak the information because it's very obvious that people in the administration, probably DNI types, leaked it.
Trying to sabotage that meeting. Why are you so confident the war's going to presume?
I'm not. I'm looking at it from a military perspective and also I know Donald Trump perspective, and having seen him through 4 + 2 years, almost 2.5 years or 2.5 terms, I think that's where he's going. I just think that's where he's going. I hate to say that.
No, I thought the resumption of the war was almost impossible a few weeks ago, but like seeing how things have developed since on all fronts, not just Trump, including Trump, it's looking bad.
We're even getting some allies down there now. I mean, not very formidable allies, but Britain's coming down there with major aircraft. And from a certain perspective, you got things developing between Germany and Poland that you wonder how that's going to play out too, because I just saw this morning, Poland was talking about, with Germany listening, with Merz right next door listening, Poland was talking about becoming Germany and don't worry about Germany, take your troops out of Germany, continue to take them out, put them in Poland. And we're all thinking, those of us who know the Polish leadership, the sane Polish leadership, or, they're apoplectic. Why would we be doing this? This is stupid. We do not need you in our country. We have to deal with Russia and Germany. And you aren't going to be a help with either one. You're going to be a detriment to the relations we want to develop with both. So, I mean, they've got a history. They know that history is dominated by Germany and dominated by Moscow. But and I saw this morning that we're not going to do that. So, sane decision, maybe. Keep watching it, though. Keep watching it.
Colonel, something just came to mind that I'm hoping I'd be wrong with. So Khan, what triggered it is the following report by Khan News from Israel. Israeli and U.S. officials say senior IDF and CENTCOM officers held talks over the past week as they await Trump's decision on Iran following his China visit. One of the options discussed includes targeted strikes on Iranian energy infrastructure and oil facilities. So that report came right after China said they're going to buy more oil from the US. Because for that to happen, that means China maybe expects the Strait of Hormuz to be closed for longer, or maybe the energy infrastructure in the Gulf to be hit. So if you're talking about a resumption of the war, and now we're talking about, and we know this already because there's been statements about it, that one of the options is start striking their energy and oil infrastructure. That means Iran would retaliate by striking the energy infrastructure in the Gulf.
Right.
So China needs American oil infrastructure. So
you're thinking like a military man now. I would be.
Yeah, but that's terrifying.
If I were Xi Jinping or if I were his chief of staff in the military, I'd be telling him, we need to have a little backup here. At least for 6 months to a year, we need to have a little backup. The United States has a lot of oil and LNG, so let's make a deal with them on that, because they're seeing what you just described as a possibility.
That is a terrifying possibility.
Yep.
Is there a possibility that China abandons Iran?
Not completely. I think not. That would mean abandoning the most important of their railroads, which is the southern one, and all the plans associated with it, which were as probably important to this new overland commerce as all the others combined, because it's so critical to be able to get in 25 hours from China's Pacific ports into the heart of Europe, the heart of the Caucasus, the heart of Central Asia, and everything that flows in between, which is basically Iran, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Georgia. This is the old route. This is, if you go back 1,000 years, 1,200 years, you'll see that this is what they did at the time. Maritime empires were charging so much that they had to figure out a way to do it over land, and they did. And this was part of the route they used. It's the same route. It's a historic route. It's also the route we use. Most people don't know this. Probably as important, if not more important, than Murmansk during World War II to resupply the Soviet Union. It's one of the reasons Stalingrad was able to hold out.
So that historically speaking, that route is extremely important.
Very important.
And based on that, there's no scenario, logical scenario, especially with China's long-term thinking, that they would abandon Iran.
I don't think so. They might temporarily appear to be doing so, but they'd be right back at it as soon as things calm down.
So how would that resumption of the war look like in your view? Could we see targeting of energy infrastructure? Would it be an escalation ladder? You already talked about massive firepower, but would it start immediately with massive firepower? Would it be a decapitation strike, or all of the above? To what extent will there be an escalation ladder, and how would Iran respond? I know there's a lot of questions, but I'm curious to see what happens next.
I think it would be all of the above, and maybe some more that we're not even thinking about. And I think the decision then would be compelled. It would be forced on Iran. If I'm told right that this place that they're doing this research and technological building, what the North Koreans taught them to do, matching warhead to missile and putting the fissile material in the warhead and so forth, all of which I think they've mastered on the computer. If they're actually putting hand to metal, hand to plastic, whatever, in this underground chamber and building several nuclear warheads, that would be the deal breaker. That would make them go ahead, I think. So then they come out of there with several nuclear weapons. The North Koreans came out with 6, then 12, then 18, very, very rapidly, and built forward over the next year to about 50. So they learned from the North Koreans. The North Koreans were there during the time that we were searching out the AQ-Khan network and trying to put a stop to it, the spread of nuclear weapons to a number of Muslim countries and to others. Gaddafi was probably the prominent one at the time. But we put a stop to that by stopping the supplies from flowing in from all kinds of countries, including Germany. I don't think they were witting, but some of their people were actually providing the material that they needed to build the weapons. And North Korea got that too. And they got lots of Soviet scientists who were essentially let go by Gorbachev's complex, and they had very good lives. They had great salaries. They had dachas, they had cars, they had everything. And all of a sudden they were poor people. So they went to North Korea, they went to Iran, they went to other places that were looking like they might build a nuclear weapon. So those people are there, that knowledge is there, and it would not be much to build 12 or 13 bombs fairly rapidly. And against Israel, who's your main problem and your main target, it doesn't take many. It's a very small country.
I had, as I said earlier, I had the journalist from Al Jazeera that broke the story on Mujtaba Khamenei's demands, Ali Hashim from Al Jazeera. And he told me he was in Iran, he's going to Lebanon again, so he's interviewed the foreign minister of Iran, etc. And he said, Mario, I wouldn't be surprised now if I had to guess after this war that Iran accelerates, as you're saying, accelerates their efforts to gain a nuclear weapon, because they would believe this is the only deterrent because they've just been attacked. And what you're saying right now is they could be working on it as we speak, and they could be doing it underground in the same underground facilities or similar underground facility to the ones that, to the 90% that were bombed and not destroyed, to the 90% that Israel said, according to Channel 12 weeks ago, they cannot destroy militarily. They don't have the capacity to. So technically, unless there's a massive ground operation in Iran, they have potentially the will, or likely the will and the capabilities of being able to develop a nuclear weapon underground. And it's almost inevitable now. I actually had, funny enough, I had General Wesley Clark on the show just a couple of hours ago, and he said the same thing. He said, Mario, I think more than ever now, Iran has the willingness to develop a nuclear weapon. They have the capability to do it.
I think that's true. Ted Postall with me in a telephone call put it at 60 to 80%.
Wow.
That's pretty strong.
I know I've said this so many times, but what a terrible, stupid war with disastrous consequences. And as you said, it's not even over. What do you make of the Gulf? The reports that Saudi attacked Iran, the UAE attacked Iran, Saudi and Kuwait attacked groups, proxies or allies of Iran and Iraq. What is the Gulf's approach going to be in this war, and what is the impact on those countries as well?
I think it's indicative of the absolute chaos in the former GCC countries and in the Arab world in general. And I don't think anybody's leading them. I don't think anybody's strategy is being implemented in any decisive way. I think they're all operating off individual sheets of music, whether it's Mohammed Zayed or Mohammed bin Salman or any of the other leaders, Oman being the exception, but Oman being the less warlike and the one most interested in peace and diplomacy. No one's listening to Oman anymore. And they're making their own separate routes, I think. And it's going to be disastrous for them in the long run. But how do you break free if, like Mohammed bin Salman, I think, would love to break free, if he could, if it were feasible, of the U.S. tit, if you will. He'd love to quit sucking on it. I'm not so sure he'd love to quit forcing some of the milk in himself, not to strain the analogy too much, but the Saudis do as much to us as we do to them. But breaking that all off and finding a replacement for it, or doing it yourself, or a combination of the two, is a huge challenge. And so none of the royals, and not him, I don't think yet, are willing to think about and plan for that and do it. Now, I know they put aside some money for that as a possibility, but I don't think they've really got a strategic plan that they could implement tomorrow morning and do it. Now, UAE may have, but UAE is a pipsqueak. Despite the fact they call themselves a little Sparta and all, they are a pipsqueak. There's not even an Athens for them to take on. And they're seeking Israel's help. And that shows you how weak they are, because they're seeking the country's help, whom the Omani foreign minister has said is the real problem in the Levant. And he's right.
And the former Saudi intelligence, head of intelligence, and the former Saudi foreign minister, I think, both said, I wrote it down somewhere, both said the same thing, that Israel tried to drag the Gulf into this war and blamed Israel for this war. So many Gulf countries are blaming Israel for this war. But you're saying the UAE, the reason they sought Israel's help is because of desperation with the volume of attack by Iran, because they had no choice.
I think so. And it was a bad decision even with that, because they did have a choice. They had the choice of sucking it up and riding it out and taking the hits. I mean, that's tough for these people who've been living in luxury for so long. But maybe you got to do that for a little while until things sort themselves out.
But the issue in the UAE, I live in the UAE, by the way, and the issue is that the lifestyle in the UAE is about that security, safety, predictability. So it's a lot more vulnerable to other Gulf countries like Saudi. And it's obviously a lot more small. It's a city state as well. So that means if they do get hit, that could be almost existential for those countries. Like one missile or one drone striking a place like the Burj Khalifa, and there was a drone that got intercepted next to it, is pretty significant, because they depend a lot on that, being the place of safety and security for the wealthy and powerful.
And looking at Bahrain must scare them to death, because I mean, it pretty much got wiped out. And Qatar's pretty vulnerable too when you think about it. Yeah.
They have also. I did a post a few days ago. I said, if you want to understand really why the Gulf is in a very difficult position, and it should never, should under all circumstances avoid any direct conflict with Iran, is because of one number. The number of expats in Iran is less than 5%. The number of expats in the Gulf that are not citizens of these Gulf countries that could leave at any time, 90% of the UAE and Qatar, and all the others are 60 to 80%. That's very significant. And that's why I was really shocked to know that Saudi and UAE attacked Iran.
And the rest of the population is wage slaves from Africa or India.
Or Asia. Or Asia, yeah, India, Pakistan.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating model. There, Khan News just put out a report by, so it's the same report I mentioned earlier, but they put more information. So Israel believes, according to Khan News, so we saw that from Channel 12, now it's Khan News. Israel believes that Trump will decide whether to renew military action against Iran after he returns from his trip to China, according to Khan News. Senior IDF and CENTCOM officials have held talks over the past week regarding potential renewed action against Iran. Discussions included the possibility of targeted U.S. strikes on Iranian fuel and energy infrastructure, which we've talked about, aimed at pressuring Tehran back into negotiations and forcing concessions on its nuclear program. Israel has conveyed to Washington that it favors resuming military operations against Iran and believes Operation Roaring Lion ended too soon. Roaring Lion. So this is, if they do this, that means, so Trump is in a position right now, Colonel, the way I see it is, do I value the security of the Gulf more, or do I value us winning in Iran or Iran conceding, not a strong Iran? Which one's more important to me? Because if he decides to double down on Iran, he sacrificed the Gulf. If he decides to walk away for the sake of the Gulf, among other things, munitions, global economy, etc., he's just made Iran stronger than ever. So from a legacy perspective, but also a geopolitical, strategic perspective, it's obviously a big loss. That many say it's the least bad option, so he should walk away. But that is his calculation. Is it fair to say that if he decides to attack Iran, that means he made the decision that the Gulf and the global economy are less of a priority than advancing direct American strategic interests, or some, including Israeli interests as well? I can't discount that as well. It's very, very important. Well, is that the wrong way of looking at it?
You framed it pretty well, I think, on both sides of the coin, if you will. And I have no idea which way Trump's going to go, but I tend to think he's going to go the way that Bibi asked him to go. Yeah. And Bibi seems adamant. Now, there are some real political problems developing for Bibi, but I've said this so many times, I'm tired of saying it. He seems to be able to get away from him. He seems to be able to get away from. You think he'll do it again? He'll get out of it again? I would not put any money against Bibi. He's just too good at it. And you have to remember that all the polls that are conducted that are reliable, I think, still show anywhere from 75 to 82% of the Israeli Jewish population might hold their nose when you mention Bibi Netanyahu, but they're very much in favor of what he's doing. And if anything, they wish he'd do more of it.